Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Land Bodybuilding Mountain. And today I want to talk about getting the most out of any exercise that you're doing. Now, a lot of times we talk about different sorts of strategies here, such as strategic range of motion, or just small tweaks that you can do with an exercise to ensure that you are stimulating the muscle that you want to hit. Now, where most people get into trouble is that they get stuck in the proper way to do an exercise in order to compare their reps to other people. So it's basically a competition of who can do more reps with a certain weight using an exact same technique. But like we've talked about lots of times, some techniques out there that might be right for some people will injure you. And I've seen this over and over again. Guys walking around the gym with shoulder injuries and stuff, and I watch how they bench press and what they're doing with their dumbbell bench, and you could see right away how they got injured, right? Because they're like, ow, 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 and then they continue to do the same exercise, even though they're getting ow, ow, right? So if you punch yourself in the face, don't be surprised if you get a black eye. That's really my point. And some people, they do this because they're stuck in the competition side of things. So really what I'm going to say here is that as you evolve in your natural bodybuilding journey, you should get wiser. You should eventually start to say, wow, why am I just beating myself to death? Why am I doing an exercise that's actually hurting me? Why don't I try to adjust this to see if it'll work? Now, a standard example of this was when I was in the gym back in the day. I was 19 years old. I was getting some great arm development from the way I was bicep curling. And I had this 30-year-old personal trainer that would come around and say, oh, you're cheating on your barbell curls. You're not doing them right. But he had arms like that. Like his arm development was crap. And he would always blame it on his, oh, it's just that I just don't have good genetics, right? Like he would always talk about his genetics. But when I saw him do arm curls, you could see clearly that he was not accessing his biceps. He was using a lot of his front delts and shoulders and getting obsessed with moving the bar from point A to point B. So I'm not saying this technique is wrong if it feels right to you, if it starts to really access that bicep and starts to give you growth. But if it isn't, then you have to look at the technique. So with barbell curls, I always found it best to keep the elbows back, especially when I'm using decent weight, and just bring the bar straight up and down, not in this arcing sort of motion. Now, you've seen me do this with lighter weight because then the front delt doesn't become as much of a weak link and I start to get a certain amount of bicep pump from it. But once I get into heavier weight, then it feels better to keep the elbows back. So that's the other principle is sometimes heavyweight and lightweight will have two different techniques, which seems contradictory, but the truth is that there are certain thresholds of strength that certain muscles will have. And once you go beyond that, then they might not be able to perform the same task they were performing before. Not exactly in the same way, anyway. Now, another thing I would do with bicep curls is on the incline, I would rotate the arms out and curl up, where a lot of guys would get stuck with just saying forward and back, forward and back. And that, again, if it's working for you, can be fine, but it's good to adjust how much you are externally rotating or internally rotating and find out where are you feeling those forces. Are you feeling them on the biceps primarily or on the shoulders, right? Because a lot of people get caught up in doing an incline curl properly and they start overextending the delts and taking some of the stress off the bicep, but actually feeling massive stretch on the delts. And if that's happening, then you're not going to get the most amount of development in the biceps from that. And worst case scenario, you might just irritate your shoulders. So whatever muscle hits failure first in a given set is the muscle that will develop the most. That's what people have to remember. So regardless of what technique you're using, if you're noticing there's a certain muscle group that's hitting failure first, and it's not the one you want to get results in, then you have to strategically work with maybe a different range of motion or a different exercise in order to access that muscle that you're most interested in hitting. Now, I'm not saying to make super awkward exercises. That's the other trap people get caught in, where they start to get too creative and then they start to put their body into compromised positions that create injuries. But the truth is that if you really are open-minded with experimenting with how you are doing things, you'll realize that there is a subtlety to this game that is most often missed when you are just receiving information and people saying, hey, just do arm curls. Well, arm curl like this, arm curl like this, arm curl like this, right? Arm curl like that. You know, all these different variations will create dramatically different effects. And it's up to you to blend your awareness with what technique you're using in order to understand what part of your body is going to develop. And I know lots of guys that oversimplify this, where they say, hey, what's the point of supinating when you do curls when if you pronate, you're going to get the same development. But when I look at their arms, they didn't get the same development that I got, you know, when my arms were at their best in my competition years. And at the same time, they're also assuming that your muscular attachments are the same as their own. So you cannot make this assumption. You have to experiment and find out. But that's the biggest thing I found a lot of natural bodybuilders would fail at. It's that they would fail at really assessing each individual exercise and saying to themselves, what muscle or group of muscles is hitting failure first? And only through knowing that will you know what the exercise is doing for you. I saw lots of guys squat ass to the grass and get a good developed ass and really good developed sides of their hips, but their quadriceps, their actual sweep of their quadriceps didn't develop. And a lot of times their hamstrings didn't either if their ass was taking all the stress. So if they changed their strategy, they could have developed better legs rather than just a gigantic ass, right? So it just depends on what you're looking to develop. And you know, then from there, you can get creative when it comes down to your individual exercises or what exercises you choose to use primarily instead of getting caught up in doing something that everybody else is doing. Because if you start looking at other people and doing everything they're doing, it might not work out the same way for yourself. That's really my point. So as you guys know, I applied this principle with chest training. I applied it with back training. I applied it with tricep training. I just noticed that when I did a movement a certain way, different muscles came into play. So when I did pull-ups, if I leaned back and stuck the chest out, and I wasn't so worried about the bar coming down and hitting my chest and me rotating over the bar, what happened was I got a lot of back development and a lot of back stress. But when I was doing a pull-up and I tried to get my chin over the bar, what would happen? I'd get this rotation going on, and now a whole bunch of different muscles would come into play. My biceps, of course, because I was trying to bend the elbows as much as possible to pull myself up over the bar, and it was no longer the back taking the majority of the stress. So this is something I want you to really look at. You know, take a look at every exercise you do and say, where am I feeling it? And then from there, you blend the feeling and then adjust the technique based on where you're feeling stuff going on. And then from there, you can make each exercise the most efficient possible for you to gain as much muscle and strength as possible and avoid injuries at the same time. Mountain. So I hope this helps out in your training. Thanks a lot for watching. If you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgalantbodybuilding.com, and thanks to the Patreon supporters, and take care for now.